Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and talk about them on the internet. This is a short companion video to my review of the Philip K. Dick story Minority Report. I wanted to talk about some thoughts I had while reading this story, but they didn't really fit into the review itself. So, for my thoughts on the story, go take a look at the link below to the written review. This video is going to focus more on the rather sparse world building and how sometimes less is more. So, in the story, there are constant references to a federated West Bloc. Now, this is a clear reference to the NATO powers, generally the nations of Western Europe, Canada, and the United States, which were considered the Western powers at the time the story was written. What other nations might be involved in the Federated West Bloc, I'm not entirely sure of because it's not really discussed, not the point of the story. But there are hints. There's repeated mentions of a Senate trying to claw back power from our protagonist, but nothing about a president or a lower house or even a Supreme Court. They just talk about a Senate. You need a permit not to have a permanent address, which strongly suggests that freedom of movement has been incredibly curtailed. There's a mention that there was once a federated West Bloc army, but the Senate abolished it, but there's a clearly functional national army. There's also mentions of a large war being waged in the past called the Anglo-Sino War, which weirdly suggests that it was a war between the Anglo nations, mostly considered the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Given that no one has to report to Beijing, I'm going to assume the Anglos won. Weirdly, though, the general that a lot of characters give credit to for winning the war seems largely unknown. Our own protagonist, Anderton, has no idea who he is, despite, at least in theory, living through the war. Plus, this guy runs the biggest and most powerful law enforcement agency in the country, and he doesn't know about this politically influential ex general? This is like the director of the FBI not knowing who generals like Mathis or Patronus are. it, this could be a plot hole or it could be something else. Was this general memory hold? Was he, swept under the rug? We're also left to ask, why was the federal army abolished in the first place and replaced with a national army? Which brings me what I'm going to actually talk to about the rest of the video. That being world building. It's a popular topic on YouTube and Reddit and pretty much everywhere else that you see creative types getting together. It's definitely fun, and I want to encourage anyone who wants to just try it out to go ahead and do it. Just it doesn't even have to be attached to a story. You can just make a world to make a world. It's perfectly okay. Now, I will note that I see a lot of world builders have what I kind of call a completionist streak, wanting to flesh out and document every last inch of their world before going to anything else, or even starting on their characters if they want to write a story, which is not a terrible thing of itself. Although the saying, sometimes you have to shoot the engineer and just build the dang thing, comes to mind. But I'm going to tell you, it's not necessary for telling a good story to be that in depth on your world building. In fact, sometimes less is more, and your readers will have more fun if you leave space for them to speculate and try to piece things together about your world through implication. Of course, you might ask, what is important in world building then? Now, some people are going to tell you that realism is the most important thing in world building, but let's be honest. If you're telling a story that revolves around dragons or mutant psychics who can see the future, there's a limit to the realism you can display here. And that's okay. Instead, I'm going to tell you to focus on something called internal consistency. That is keeping the story, its themes and details consistent. So if your story focuses on what would life be like if electricity didn't work, keeping everything consistent is more important than completely rewriting the physics system. I know there's probably some engineers and scientists losing their minds because I said that, but we're writing a story here. So just roll with it. Because as long as everything adds up in the context of the story or is presented as a mystery or unanswered question, you'll find a lot of readers are willing to accept that. They will roll with you on this for the sake of the story. So, what will lose you readers is probably what you're asking. And you'll lose readers if the story doesn't add up or if you're asking them to accept things that knock them out of the story. To go back to my earlier example, if you've established that electricity does not happen in this universe, it doesn't exist, and then a character solves all their problems by making a lightning gun with no explanation or build up, your readers are going to have trouble with that. I would have trouble with that. Now, it's okay to have characters within a story disagree about facts on their world. You can have character A say, this is history, this is how things happened, whatever many years ago, and character B going, no, that story is a lie, or this guy is pig ignorant and doesn't know. This is what actually happened, and you don't actually have to tell the readers who's right. You can let them debate that out amongst themselves. That actually could be a good way of drawing your readers in. So it's okay to have characters within the story argue over what their world is like if you want. Just to be clear on that. But you need to stay consistent on the rules and internal logic of the story. To give you another example, if you have established without a doubt that that a certain species turns to stone in daylight, and then the very next chapter there's a member of that same species strutting around at high noon, I'm kind of wondering what's going on, right? This kind of stuff will break down what we call the suspension of disbelief, which is when your writers are willing to accept things that are fantastical because it's part of the logic of the story. If you lose your readers or watchers, they stop taking part of your work, and now you don't have an audience. So you can see the issue there. Another issue is that the world serves as the stage and context for the plot and your character's actions. If that stage can't metaphorically bear the weight of your characters and the plot, the whole thing collapses and you don't really have a story or a coherent narrative anymore. You have a bunch of random things that happen to people, which is less entertaining than a good narrative, honestly. Now, this isn't to tell anyone to stop world building. If you take joy in intricately crafting every detail of your world, you go right ahead. You do what makes you happy. But for those of you who just want to tell a story, keep in mind sometimes less is more. You don't have to detail every tree in the forest. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like or a comment or even subscribe to the channel, as that really helps me in my struggle against the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider joining the ranks of my Everwise Patreons as well, whose votes decide future content. It was their votes that had us continue the tradition of Philip K. Dick Month. There's a pair of polls up right now, and you get a vote for as little as $1 a month. I'm also going to be posting a patrons only podcast around the end of this month, discussing the differences between the written work and the film. Speaking of patrons, special thanks to Big Steve, who is my biggest supporter. Thank you, Steve. Could not do this without you. Next week, we're going to look at the pilot of the Minority Report television show. Brace yourselves. Until then, take care of yourselves, each other, and of course, keep reading.